Welcome, everyone, to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we are tackling a grand, overarching mystery of human society. We're going to mentally animate the core ideas from a truly fascinating working paper by Sanjay Kumar titled A Psychosocial Dynamic Model of Caste System. Basically, our goal today is to uncover exactly why such an ancient, deeply entrenched social structure manages to not just survive, but thrive in modern times. We're going to set this psychological machine in motion and make the invisible forces that shape society completely visible.
Okay, let's dive into this. For decades, a lot of sociologists just assumed that as a society modernized, these archaic systems would naturally fade away. But consider this wild paradox. Modern capitalism, the rise of democratic politics, and massive leaps in scientific advancement have utterly failed to dismantle this hierarchy. Actually, in some ways, they've adapted right to it. So how on earth does a system survive the very forces that were explicitly designed to replace it?
To answer that big question, we really have to look past standard sociology. Here is our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start by examining the modern caste paradox, then reveal the dual psychological poles that govern it. Next, we'll untangle the web of disdain and identify the psychological glue holding it all together. Finally, we'll look at the surprising Sanskritization effect before discussing what it takes to break this invisible field. Basically, we have to uncover the hidden psychological machine running underneath it all.
Section 1. The Modern Caste Paradox. A System Surviving Time.
So, democracy and modern markets were supposed to turn the caste system into a simple class system based entirely on wealth. But they didn't. Why? Well, because it's not just a set of archaic laws anymore. Think about it. There is no central king today. There's no single authority or governing body enforcing this system. Instead, it survives as this grassroots, self-correcting psychological mechanism. The research calls it a field effect. It is literally maintained day in and day out by thousands of local decisions and deeply internalized beliefs.
Section 2. The Dual Psychological Poles. Knowledge and Disdain. Imagine society as a giant magnetic field, organized by two incredibly powerful psychological extremes. On one side, we have the positive, or knowledge pole. This pole acts like a giant magnet pulling people in. It offers cultural leadership, existential meaning, and psychological restoration. Historically, this space was held by the Brahmin caste, providing answers to life's biggest uncertainties. On the flip side, the disdain pole actively repels. It acts as a literal dumping ground for social disgust and is tied to the lowest socioeconomic status. The whole system is completely governed by this continuous push and pull between these two extremes.
Section 3. The Web of Disdain. Multi-group complexity.
To really grasp this, listen to this powerful metaphor by researcher Sanjay Kumar. He says, garbage is produced in everyone's home. One's own garbage doesn't evoke as much disgust as one's neighbor's. But the place where the entire neighborhood's garbage is dumped is a center of collective disgust. That perfectly illustrates how the negative pole is formed. The most vulnerable groups become a societal dumping yard, targeted by a massive consensus of disdain from absolutely everyone else.
So the crucial takeaway here is what the research calls the inseparability logic. Think about it. If you have a society with just two groups, escaping a stereotype is hard, but it's possible. But in a multi-group society, say an Indian village with 10 castes, 9 of those castes will all agree on the negative stereotypes of the 10th. This creates a vast, inescapable web of shared negative consensus. You just can't walk away from a reality that the entire rest of your society unanimously agrees upon.
Section 4. The Psychological Glue. Forces binding the groups.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that we can start to put this psychological machine into motion. Notice Caste A position near the top and Caste B down near the bottom. They are constantly being acted upon by 4 very distinct directional forces. You've got the knowledge pull, that's the desire to move upward toward meaning and status. Then there's the avoidance push, the desperate drive to move away from that negative pole of disgust. But working right against those are the Varna push, which is the sheer inertia of traditional hierarchy, and the stereotype push, the downward pressure of societal prejudice. A group's exact position is ultimately determined by the net effect of these 4 invisible forces.
But where exactly do these downward forces come from? Well, they stem from deeply ingrained psychological traits. The first is social dominance orientation, or SDO. This is basically a generalized tendency of dominant groups to simply view hierarchy as completely natural. They genuinely believe some groups are just inherently superior. Higher castes use this psychological trait to justify their dominance, and that is exactly what generates that relentless stereotype push downward onto the castes below them.
The second trait is right-wing authoritarianism, or RWA. This one focuses on group-based security, obeying authorities, and strict conformity to tradition. And here is the absolute ultimate paradox of the entire system. Even marginalized, totally exploited groups often exhibit high RWA. Why on earth would they do that? Because the world is scary and uncertain, and submitting to the traditional hierarchy provides a sense of systemic security and predictability. The marginalized groups themselves often provide the very psychological support that keeps the whole system stable.
Section 5. The Sanskritization Effect. Wealth meets psychology.
Now, you would naturally think that gaining modern secular wealth would finally liberate a group from the traditional caste system, right? But the research points to something called a facilitation effect. Economic and scientific success often doesn't erode caste identity at all. It actually increases a group's attraction to the knowledge pole. So new money doesn't break the system, surprisingly, it fuels it.
And this brilliantly illustrates the process known as Sanskritization. Here's how it works. Step 1. A lower or middle-tier group gains economic wealth in the modern capitalist market. Awesome. But then, Step 2. Despite all their new money, they experience a status void. They lack existential meaning in the traditional cultural landscape. So, Step 3. To legitimize their new success, they start adopting traditional Brahminical practices, things like dietary restrictions, complex rituals, and older customs. They essentially use their modern wealth to buy their way into the traditional psychological hierarchy, which totally reinforces the very system they might have otherwise challenged.
Section 6. Breaking the invisible field. Dismantling the machine.
When we view this system in its entirety, we see that because of these intense, competing psychological pressures, the machine is fundamentally self-correcting. When a group tries to integrate or move up, the internal pressures often cause them to just split apart, a process called bifurcation. Subgroups will literally divide themselves to preserve their relative status and distance themselves from any negative stereotypes. This internal splintering thwarts true social integration at absolutely every turn.
So the overarching takeaway from all of this analysis is pretty profound. Modernity, by itself, is simply not enough. Secular economic growth, new laws, political shifts, none of these can dismantle a machine that is powered by our deepest human psychological needs. The knowledge pole survives because humans desperately need existential meaning, and the disdain pole, along with these rigid hierarchies, they survive because humans inherently crave social security and dominance.
Which leaves us with this final really provocative question to reflect on. How can we possibly dismantle a hierarchy that is so deeply embedded, it literally lives inside our own psychology? Until we can provide alternative ways to fulfill these fundamental needs for meaning and security, the invisible field is going to remain. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the invisible forces around you, and I really look forward to exploring more fascinating research with you next time.